Production sound mixer Maurizio Argentieri's career has included John Wick Chapter 2, Catch-22, The Life Ahead, and The Equalizer 3. His latest project is the acclaimed Netflix limited series, Ripley. I guess, Maurizio, just to start, Ripley is a show where the character is often, very alone, very comfortable with his silence, but obviously it's not silent because there's so much natural sound and the environment is not silent. So I guess, like, kind of, how did you, I was like, wrote down like noisy silence. How do you approach that kind of thing? I guess, like, where it's like not the natural sounds of it.
Well, believe it or not, this was yes, thank you for asking this key element because believe it or not, this was my one of the best warriors for the entire show, as you can imagine. But because normally for a production sound mixer, when you read pages without no dialogue, you can be relaxed. But when I read the pages of Ripley, I say, this is not the case because between those pages, between those line of dialogue and a lot of descriptions in those pages, there are descriptions of emotions, of feelings, and situations and sensations. And I understand immediately that most of them was leading by sound. And so I immediately, it was the first time for me working with Steven. And just to give you an idea, we were in the middle of pandemic, and as you know, Italy was, was hit very hard by the pandemic, and so we shot the show in the middle of that. So relationship wise was not very confident because we have to keep each other away. So yeah, in terms of interplay and and jam session thing was very hard. So going back to your first question, this is just an introduction to let you understand, it was really tricky.
Yeah.
And just to give you an introduction, I understand uh, pretty well that I have to be on control of everything because I was the first one who put the first stone on the construction of the sound of Ripley. And if you see the series, everything, is around, 80% around, production sound. And also there was a lot of other element handled by sound designer, and, but, I felt that I have to give the show something important. So, like, I'll give you an example. The apartment in Rome of Tom Ripley was made in the soundstage. It's fake. But everything you hear sounds so naturally because there was one person that was controlling, like a hawk during 1 month of construction, that the sound floor was put in a proper way that when an actor walk on that, it sound properly and the footstep doesn't sound fake. So it made by real wood. I ordered a special decoupling system to place underneath the floor. All the Ferragamo's shoes are original. So I didn't use, for example, any single piece of dumping thing. So any footstep you hear in the series was, extremely original because I used, I approach all that scene like a small acoustic concert. Instead of, I have violins in front of me, I have heels and movement, fabric, breathing, and I make a meeting with the actors and asking them to not think that I was crazy if I place a radio mics on them while they don't have any line of dialogues, because I thought that even a small breathing and a small reaction for the show was extremely important. The other thing was the space. Because okay, this was an example, for example, but we shoot the series in a lot of beautiful real places in Italy,
Yeah.
like Venice, Amalfi Coast, and other beautiful part of Rome. And of course, the original sound was very important. And for me, having a specific immersive rig was very important in this show. So I used a custom-made special immersive double MS rig using a large diaphragm microphone that I can control live with the matrix on my mixing board and give to the editorial department, for example, a version of 5.0 opening of this double MS thing.
Wow.
And that's, for example, this is a small idea, but if you can, if you watch the series, you can imagine how peculiar was this attention for
Yeah.
the
I mean,
show.
it's really incredible, and it sounds so like all of this. I'm not surprised to hear you say this because it's like all of it is so like it is so realistic. It just is so. I guess one of the things you said there, I was interested. Like, does the peer like did you do research into like the period to help with the sound, like how things should sound, or does that because it is obviously a period piece, or are you just like not? Does that not kind of focus? Does that not like draw focus for
Well,
you?
I mean, the period influenced me in another way. I mean, all the object that was there was original.
Right.
Everything. I mean, everything. But also, this is not about only about me because Stephen is very specific. Stephen, is a true, is a dreaming director to work with. For me, it was such an honor. I learned so much. Uh, in this show was really an honor. So and so I get a lot of support from him
Yeah.
for the entire show. And so I was influenced by the period in another way because I want to put a specific signature, for example, in the sound. And because it was black and white, and the style Steven creates around the characters and all this, the tone of the story was very, very specific and in create such kind of tension, for example. So believe it or not, I've used for recording the voice of the actors, for example, tubes microphone preamplifiers,
Huh.
because I want to be attached as a main character to the sound of that period. And so I've used an original Mali tubes microphone preamplifier with the ACC 83 inside, coming from General Electric as a new old stock part of tubes, and using on booms, for example, large diaphragm microphone again to get the sound of the voice. Of course, I put lavaliers as a support, but only as a backup. So I make a decision another time, and is on top on my shoulder this kind of decision, because once you decide to give the sound such kind of character, you cannot go back again.
Right.
And so it's like a stamp, it's like an original stamp. And of course I talked with Steven, but he didn't realize the decision I made until he get in the editing room and he wrote me a beautiful letter.
Oh, that's amazing. You mentioned this stamp and the signature. I wanted to add, like, which is great, and I think that again sounds good. I want to actually ask you about actual signatures. In the seventh episode, there's a lot of writing in notebooks and guest books. And Mao, it just sounds great. The way the writing, and again, it sounds so great. So at the risk of being like, how did you do that? Like, how does it sound? How did you get the writing, the pencil on the notebook sounding so good?
Yes, that's another thing. I for this I have to thank really with the deep of my soul and heart the crew that was around me, that was so patient to make the set so silent in a way that I can crank up the gain of my microphone preamplifiers and get the sound you noticed, because that's that's another key element. And also, I have to tell you another little, if I have time, I don't know
Yeah,
if I have
yeah.
time, and another little secret, because because there is a lot of tension in the show, and part of this tension was delivered by the contrast we made using, for example, a full analog technique to recording the voice of the actor, but a pristine and clean sound to preamplify the special microphone rig to get the space of the show. So the space and the voice are going for the entire show on two different layers that create this kind of tension during the 8 hours, and I think more than 8 hours show, plus the beautiful work that all the mixers, the recording mixers, the sound designers, the dialogue editors did during the entire show, giving another layer of brightness to all the sound that they put in the show. The sound was made by very tiny and delicate elements, but they are so important that even if they are very delicate, they can come straight to your emotional part.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's incredible, incredible stuff. Maurizio Argentieri, excuse me, from Ripley, production sound mixer. Thank you so much.
Thank you, really, thank you.
Supervising sound editor Brian Armstrong was an Emmy nominee for Westworld and Deadwood the movie. Other projects have included The Walking Dead and The Right Stuff, and his latest project is the FX series Shogun. Brian, it's an incredible show, and I know it placed a huge priority on this authenticity to the era, obviously. And I guess I just want to start, like, how does that impact your work on the sound when there's probably not anything? I guess there's not a lot of recordings, certainly from 17th century feudal Japan. So, like, how does that help, or how does that kind of impact your work?
Yeah, we were shocked with how little recordings exist from that period. It was definitely a challenge. I mean, because that's what Justin Marks and Rachel Kondo wanted. Above all else was authenticity. So we worked with we had got in touch with a couple sound designers in Japan just to kind of ask for some nature recordings, not necessarily to use because it's really hard to find recordings that don't have modern Japanese in it or some sort of modern technology, cars, planes, all that kind of stuff. So it was more to get nature recordings that we can then sort of source. The crickets, make sure they sound like this, and it sounds funny, but crickets sound different. Frogs, definitely different. So we had great source recordings for that, and then because there is a lack of technology in our show, we relied a lot on nature. Jim Gallivan, the sound designer, found a collection of scientific recordings of birds of Japan. Each track had information on the type of bird, location, time of year. He researched the migration patterns of the birds, and so it was really kind of sort of a signpost of where we are throughout the show.
That's amazing. And are you also able to use the original novel too at all? And like, is there any, like, did you go back and look at that? Like, are there descriptions or anything in there that also help, or no?
Not so much. We kind of let the story in front of us dictate it. It so closely resembled it,
Right.
the story. So like also with Foley, Foley did an incredible job of getting authentic tatami mats, the slippers, and the kimonos, everything that we see. They went through great extremes to make sure they found authentic props. Jim and I also went up to set, and we got to record some stuff around set. A lot of the doors, pretty much, I think every single door you hear in the show, we recorded there on set. And just sort of background knockabout stuff that we were able to get our hands on.
And then how about in terms of like with the actors and their dialogue? I guess a little like was it a challenge at all, or like, because one of the things I know about the show is that like the show, a lot of the characters have very few words, so that were very impactful things that they're saying, and also are not raising their, like, Blackthorn obviously is very loud and gruff as the Englishman coming in, but everybody else is very soft spoken, or again, like, not as aggressive as Blackthorn, at least outwardly so. And I guess was that it when you have scenes where he is like raging versus like Mariko quietly repeating what he is saying, I guess, does that present a challenge?
Absolutely. Mariko was very soft spoken, very not unemotional, but not as heightened as the buffoon that is Blackthorn. As other characters like Kiku and Gin, who like just barely barely had audible words, and it's just so delicate and soft and so stylized. It was really, really important that we capture all of that. John Creed did an incredible job, going in and cleaning everything up as much as possible. But it definitely was a challenge, because even though the show, like every line had been considered, written originally in English, translated to Japanese, sent to a Japanese playwright to sort of put a period spin on it and just sort of add the poetry to it, and then translated back to English for the subtitles. And then even at that point, it was still some going back and forth of like, oh, well, maybe this would be more eloquent if it came across like this in English than the subtitles. Every nuance, like down to what character is talking to what character as far as rank goes in the time, is different. A samurai talking to another samurai is different from a samurai talking to the Lord. So all of that was under such scrutiny. Hiroyuki Sanada and Eriko Miyagawa, Hiro obviously, who plays Toranaga, were both at every single ADR session where Japanese was spoken. They were at every single group session to sort of have oversight on, making sure the villagers weren't saying anything that they weren't supposed to, if they even said anything at all. That was really a big lesson for me, is like pulling back and having that restraint of like, even though we're in a village and, historically every TV show that we do, if you're in a city, you have call outs, and to be able to be challenged and be okay with that quiet and rely on other sounds was a really great lesson for us all.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it makes the show, like we said, like it's so authentic, and I think that comes across like when you're watching it as a viewer, just that like subtleties of all the things you're talking about. I want to talk a little about, in the 5th episode, it ends obviously with the giant earthquake, I believe, right? That's in episode 5. Just incredible, incredible sequence. Like again, like kind of out of nowhere if you haven't read the book or are not familiar with the story. So it's like great, just an incredible set piece. And I guess like basically, where'd you start on that to like make it like thinking of how's that's going to sound in that time and like to make it sound like it does. And like, I think obviously it's such a great sequence overall.
Thank you. Yeah, I think sort of the authenticity lent itself to other things beyond just the culture. I've been through my fair share of earthquakes here in Los Angeles, and it's quiet. And that's what's scary about it, And so when we went out to approach the earthquake, we wanted to have that unease, that like addition by subtraction, as it's called. We stripped all of the nature sounds and we're just left with wind. Even the music goes away just before that earthquake starts, and it does kind of give this uneasy sense, and the very first thing you hear is this flock of birds that comes up, because nature has a way of knowing before we do what's about to come. And before the rumble even starts, you hear the rocks sort of rattling on the ground, and then it just becomes insane. The landslide is really what kind of gives the sound to it, and just the specificity of the branches snapping, the trees falling. It's one of those insane times when the visual effects come in, after we had built it. And aside from, specific things that we saw after, it was just like this marriage of two incredible, designs. The visuals are stunning. It took my breath away the first time I saw it. Still does.
Yeah, it looks real, right? It looks like legitimately real. Does a sequence like that, you have to like, I mean, does that take forever for you guys to do, or like do you have more time to do that compared to other things in the episodes, or you just kind of like have to just get it in the certain amount of time that you have?
Yes. all of the above. Okay. All of the above. Yeah, we didn't get any extra time for it, but you kind of choose where to put your focus. And fortunately, 80 to 90% of Shogun is character building and talking, and plot happens through dialogue, which is really fantastic. And so what's nice about that is not only is it, I don't know, just a great way, in my opinion, to tell a story, but it really lets those big moments shine. And each episode sort of has one big moment, whether it's the cannons at the end of 4 or, the earthquake in 5. There's plenty of opportunities for sound to sort of step up and be larger than life. So
was that like, I guess what was for you then? What was the biggest challenge? Was it like that? Was it like kind of calibrating that to know that you have all that, or do you like that having the dialogue like drive so much of the story, like you're saying, and like kind of the action?
My focus tends to be more on the dialogue side. Historically, I've done more dialogue, so it's definitely where uh, what hits me first. So in that sense, it really was great. It really was an awesome opportunity to take the great production recordings from set and as great as they can be for a ship that's literally held 50 feet above the ground, getting actual bucket loads from tractors of water getting dumped onto it. We got to use most of that stuff.
Yeah,
It is really a cool it was a
definitely.
cool experience.
Yeah, and I guess look, there's more seasons to come. I know that's a very new nascent thing, but I mean, sounds like you would probably want to go back or do more in the future, I guess.
I'm in for as long as they want to bring me in. My secret heart tells me I want to do it. So
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Brian Armstrong, supervising sound editor for Shogun. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sound designer Michael Schapiro was a 5-time Emmy nominee for his work on 3 Star Trek series, and he's here to discuss 2 Star Trek series: Star Trek Stranger Worlds and Star Trek Discovery. Michael, I want to start with Stranger Worlds just because
Sure.
just to start there, it takes place obviously like I guess in the decade before the original series, right? Star
Right.
Trek the original series. So I guess knowing that, how does that impact your work as the sound designer?
It I tend to think of it as archaeological sound design. So
Okay.
we've got a lot of material from those old shows, and we can dive into old episodes and see what was done. But the initial pilot of the original series, which focused on Pike, was from 1965, somewhere around there. Uh, so it's digging in, it's isotope RX just to look at the spectrograms and kind of try and get a sense of, what might they have used to make these things. And then updating it or recreating it and getting it more modern sounding. Um, and then, it's Star Trek. The fans of Star Trek are fans of Star Trek. So they will call us out if anything is off base. So
Sure.
we've got to, you know, stick as closely as we can while updating it to modern standards, um, which can be tough sometimes. Some of those early sounds are a little cheesy, but
Hmm.
they're, iconic. So it's keeping them what you'd expect from a modern show while still honoring what was done 60 years ago almost. It's I've been enjoying it. It's been a different method of working that I'm used to, of just make something cool. It's keep it as close as you can to what was done before, but make it cool and exciting. You look at the difference between the sets on the Enterprise, and it's okay, yeah, they've got touchscreens now, and they did not have those back then. So what do we
No.
do with that? Um, it's been an adventure. Um,
Is there a sound you could think of that like you're saying like that you like that you had to like I think that is really tricky, and I was thinking like that does seem like a big challenge, like keeping the like what like if there's something that somebody expects or knows but modernizing it but in a way that's not too modern, like can you think of an example of like one that like you had to do the second season here?
for the second season, um, I mean, there's one that we kind of went a bit far away from, was the Gorn. They were in, one episode of the original series, and they were pretty. It was a pretty cheesy little monster suit kind of thing. It was exciting, but very different from what we're seeing on screen now of these, very scary lizard reptilian dinosaur monsters that are really going nuts. Uh, so that one was more just make it scary, make
So
it.
that I wrote down baby. I wrote down first. You see like a baby Gorn in the finale, I
Yeah,
think, of season 2, and I just wrote down terrifying because it is
yeah,
so it's really scary and like sound is just freaking me out basically. And
yeah.
it's like
That was our horror episode, um, with the baby Gorn and just okay, though they're small, but holy crap, are they scary? Um, that one was one of our sound editors, Kip Smedley had he has an alpaca farm. So and one of his alpacas on shearing day screams up a storm. Just she's perfectly fine from what I understand. She's just very unhappy about being sheared. So he got a microphone and that is a good chunk of the baby Gorn
wow.
is this very unhappy alpaca. Um, and I think there's another shearing day coming up in a few days, so he's getting more recording
Ready for season
for
3, I
season
guess,
three.
right? Yeah, but
Um,
then so you had the baby, and then later you have the full-grown Gorn, right? In the suit, in the
yes,
spacesuit later, which also is very cool. And like you said, like kind of does connect really coolly, I think, to the original series because it's still like a man in suit, but it's obviously not
right.
anymore like a man
Yeah,
in
and
suit.
and I mean it's really impressive what they've done with prosthetics on this show. That Gorn is a suit.
Mhm.
Like there's definitely CG, but that is a guy in a suit. Um, yeah, I couldn't tell you that from watching
No.
it. We got the first few shots. I was like, oh, they got the VFX done really early. Nope, kind of. um, so it was an impressive visual to have to come up with impressive sounds to.
So then how did you kind of evolve the sound of how the baby Gorn sounds versus the full-grown Gorn later?
It's a good chunk of it is plugins. It's Melda M Morph to get those. I'm still using the alpaca sounds, but they're combined with alligators and pigs and myself making weird sounds into a microphone, uh, and just trying to turn it up to 11 and a bit bigger, deeper, even angrier and scarier. These ones are smarter because they're bigger, so they're not just screaming. They're I think there's a moment where he's kind of trying to uh, use one of the control panels and open up a airlock or trying to get control of some part of the ship. And so you hear him. He's still scary, but I was trying to kind of go for the like, you know, grumbling at a machine that's not doing what he wants it to, uh, while still being a 8 foot tall, terrifying lizard monster. Uh, so
It's really, yeah. No, it's really great. It's so great. And even that whole sequence is great. I was just even, it was like the sound of its death is amazing. Like I just found all of the whole way that sequence is put together, is like fantastic. And I thought
well,
all the
thank you.
sound there, not just the gore, but like all the stuff that's going on. It's just so great too.
Yeah, it was all anti-gravity or lack of gravity, I guess. So doing a zero G fight scene in spacesuits was interesting. Um, and Star Trek has never ascribed to the idea of there's no sound in space. It's you know it's the one thing you always see. There's no sound in space. Well, it's Star Trek. It's fine. Um,
It would be
so
pretty boring if there was no sound in space.
yeah,
Let's be
it's
real.
like yeah, we could do it with no sound in space. My job would be a lot easier. Um, but you get bored of watching the show.
Yeah. And then before we wrap up, I wanted to switch, obviously Star Trek Discovery as well. It's starting like just overall approach for like coming to the 5th season and stuff. Like what was different, what you want to try different or anything, or is it kind of maintaining what you've done previously? Like how'd you kind of approach it?
Some of it was maintaining. Discovery was interesting. Hopefully, I don't go long here, but Discovery started before Strange New
Hmm.
Worlds. Strange New World or Discovery season 2 was kind of the sleeper pilot for Strange New Worlds. We met all those characters in season 2 of Discovery, and then spoilers, they do a time jump to about 1,000 years in the future. So there was a lot of that archaeological stuff in the first seasons, and now it's go even further past that. So it's got to, still sound like Starfleet and all the established Starfleet type of sounds, but we're 1,000 years in the future. They have crazy new technology and, nanomaterial stuff. So it's been a lot of the Starfleet stuff is pretty much the same from season 3 and 4, because of that same era. But the Breen, I'm pretty sure I've aired by now, are all pretty new. They were in Deep Space Nine, but they're also 1,000 years in the future, and they look pretty different. So they were a chance to do something new again with older material.
And is that then you work like, how much of that is usually like kind of, are you like, do you like use your imagination basically, or like how do you kind of like figure out like how it would sound like 1,000 like in that?
Oh, a lot of it is, characterization of the species in the new show. So Deep Space Nine, they were a little goofy. Now they're very imperialistic and uh, and military focused. So it was a lot more of this, not, I don't want to say harsh, but that kind of stoic, very blanket on the word, but just very military and not constrained, but
Severe maybe.
severe is a good word. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're doing this too early in the morning. I'm a sound editor. I work at night.
That's fine. That's fine.
But yeah, it was that. So trying to play into the way they're characterizing most of the species on things. So,
Right.
Vulcans are very logical and very by the book. Um, Starfleet is, heroic and the good guys, and the Breen were very severe and military,
Right.
and play on those.
Yeah. Well, it's great stuff. Sound designer Michael Schapiro
Yeah.
for Star Trek Strange New Worlds and Star Trek Discovery. Thank you so much for doing this.
Oh, thank you.
Mark Jensen is an Emmy winner for Welcome to Wrexham. Other projects have included The Playbook, Superhuman, and Master Chef USA. And he's here again to talk about Welcome to Wrexham. So, Mark, I just did for season 2, following success of season 1, where you're an Emmy winner. And I guess, like, do you come into it like got to level up, or like kind of maintain what we did before? Like, what was your level of pressure, and like kind of how'd you approach it?
Yeah, no. Season 2 was we kind of opened a new chapter with season 2 because season 1 we went into the show kind of like soccer, what? Like nobody kind of knew what the show was. After going through season 1, I asked that we go to the stadium, that we record the crowd, because I realized in English football, the crowd is a massive part of what the entire event sounds like. Kicking footballs and the sort of chatter on the field pales in comparison to what's happening with the crowd, especially with English football. They're singing songs, the boos and the whistling and the just everything. I just wanted all of that. And so, I'm always telling, you never know what you're going to get from the field. And so I'm like, guys, stereo mics pointing out at the thing, because I at least wanted, a little. And what they gave me back was quadraphonic recordings. And I mean, nothing distorted, just perfect. And we got I think we have almost 20 hours of the stadium to work with. And so season 2 was a lot of oh God, this just opens up so many vistas of what we can do. Anytime there's a little bit of a lull or something like that in the action or whatever, throw in a song, throw in a chant, throw in a cheer. There's so much meat here to work with. And so it was that was the big sea change between 1 and 2, was now we have the sound of the stadium, and we can really make people feel like they're there in an immersive situation. That audio sits, if you watch it in 5.1, that audio sits in quadraphonic and the rears are as loud as the fronts. So it is like you are there, you know. And then, you know, a lot of it too, there's a little bit of what I call leaning. So leaning is like, okay, in theory, Wrexham, the soccer team, they play half their games at home, half their games away. And we have the sound of the home crowd roaring, and I mean roaring when these guys score a goal. I mean, it is deafening. Well, am I going to use that on an away game? No, no, of course not. The other team's fans, they get the sound effects from the library. They get the little golf clappy, like, nah, you know, they're not as revved up as the home crowd, right? So there's a lot of like, when do you use a sound? When do you not use a sound? You know, kind of thing. That's a lot of fun to play with. So yeah, that was kind of like that was season two. That was the kind of the big change that we did that I think really like. But I will say that episode 207, which is the FA Cup run episode where they play Sheffield United, and at the end Ryan comes down and he's talking to the team in the locker room and he's literally in tears because like it has been they just went up against a team that is like almost a Premier League team. They're still in the, you know, National League at this point, and they tied them. They tied them in the first game, and they had to go on and play another game. And he's literally in tears. That episode is like one of the best episodes of episodic television I've worked on, and I've been doing this for almost 30 years. So I mean that episode, and just in terms of like what we did in that episode, there's so many things that they did in terms of like they're showing a lot of the sort of the newscasts of the FA Cup, like here's what's happening, here's what team is coming up, because the FA Cup is a little confusing, so we have to kind of like explain it a little bit. And they do a lot of stuff where like, oh, this television set's in a bar, and then there's a guy watching it at home, and then it's on the radio, and so there's a lot of opportunities to like put one sound newscast in a bar and in a car and in someone's living room, and then, you know, just all these different spots, and it just cuts. So just that episode, just from top to tail, there was so many little things where I was like, oh, that's dope. Oh, that's cool. Oh my God, this was amazing. You know, the working with the crowd again that we had. I mean, that episode was like ting perfect. So
it's so good. I wrote down so many things about that, especially what you're just saying there. Like I was blown away by watching, like there's a part where you're mentioning like it's going from audio to audio basically, or scene to scene. And there's a part where like Ryan and Rob are getting interviewed, I think by ESPN maybe, and Rob's in Philly and Ryan's in
Yeah.
England, and it just jumps around. Like it feels like 5 different audio. Like it just, I don't know how. I was like, how are they doing this so well and seamlessly? Like you're saying, where it's like you don't even realize you're doing it. I mean, like, yeah, like how is that, like how are you making sure it sounds right, I guess, like in those like kind of sequences?
Yeah, well, so one of the tricks of unscripted, and I'm sure the scripted guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but like unscripted, there's a lot of restoration happening. I'm not going to say that doesn't happen in scripted, but in unscripted, it's not as controlled of an environment, you know.
Right.
And so my job is to, and this is sort of like, I tend not to always talk about this because it tends to be a little technical, but I always, you know, when I get the audio and I'm like, ooh, that does not sound like what I hoped it would sound like, you know, it's like, well, what do we got? What can I do to like push this into that realm of like, nope, now we're really there, you know. For whatever reason, there seems to be real problem recording Phil, the coach, in the locker room. So he gets in that locker room and it's like, you know, it's just like distorted. It's like his mic is like falling down and, you know, somewhere in his pants or something like that. It's just awful. And somehow we've got to like try and restore that to make it sound like, oh no, we had the mic right there. Boom, perfect, you know. And oddly enough, like, and this is something I always tell our producers, I'm like, we live now in an era where things I couldn't even do 3 years ago, I can now do. I can now fix things where I would have to turn around and be like, guys, sorry, we can't fix this. I can fix it now. So it's crazy, the technology. And I know there's a lot of kind of consternation and, you know, half glass full, half glass empty with AI stuff. So far, it is half glass full. It's like helping us, you know, kind of like restore frequencies and restore fidelity that we just didn't have. And there's also a lot of kind of like little tricky things that we can do now where it's like, oh, do you want to steal the reverb of this room? This room that we're talking in right now, it's got a certain tone and you want, it's hard to match. Just steal it, put it into a plugin, reuse it. It's
Wow.
fascinating.
That's
So
amazing.
yeah, so there's a lot of the technology stuff is really helping. And it was funny, I just went to a screening. They screened the first episode for us at a kind of like a wrap party thing. And when you're in the show and you're working on it like we are right now, like, I mean, it's just all a blur, And so I went and I sat down and I watched the episode, but almost as if I was like watching it for the first time because I just forgotten everything. And I was like, this actually sounds good. I kind of couldn't believe it. And then I sat there, I was like, oh yeah, I fixed that thing. Oh yeah, that. And then oddly enough, everyone coming up, oh man, the show sounds so good. And like all the editors that work on the show, they're like, we are so sorry for what we actually give you, and I'm like, nope, it's all good. All you got to do is get close, and I'll get you the rest of the way there.
Huh.
So, yeah, so it's a super fun show to work on. It's fun to work on a show that like everybody kind of knows and sees and like has a good opinion of. When you work on a lot of reality stuff, it's like, oh, you work on that show. There's a little bit of that. This show, like all my kind of like hipster friends are like, bro, Wrexham,
You could be proud of it at like the barbecues, right? They'll be
yeah,
like, I love this show.
yeah, exactly.
Show me your Emmy, because I think that would probably be pretty good too.
Yeah.
Sound mixer Mark Jensen, welcome to Wrexham. Thank you so much for doing this.
Of course, anytime.
Ripley production sound mixer Maurizio Argentieri, supervising sound editor for Shogun Brian Armstrong, sound designer Michael Schapiro for Star Trek Strange New Worlds and Star Trek Discovery, and welcome to Wrexham sound mixer Mark Jensen. Thank you all for doing this. I guess the first thing I just want to ask broadly in terms of like your careers, like what was the first time you remember being impacted or affected by a sound or something that you saw in a show or movie where you're like, oh, like this is really cool and I like this and I'd like to maybe do this with my life and career. Maurizio, anything come to mind for you? You're on mute, Maurizio. Sorry. We can unmute you. Let's see.
Yeah, I am a sound mixer, So, yes, I have a precise moment that I remember that comes to my mind, and I'm always, crap up laughing, because it's similar to to the movie The Blues Brothers. So I literally saw the light at some moment, and because I was in the Moviola studio. And with the friends of mine, I don't know, like 35 years ago, I don't even remember, but I was young, like 18 years old, 18, 19. I was a musician, and we were there in that moviola. He was an assistant editor, and we were at night after everybody goes away, and we just have some raw stock footage, like a documentary presenting, I don't know, one place like a village or something very boring. At some point, we decided to put the Pink Floyd music underneath this boring thing, and everything changed in something very lysergic. And I say, that's the thing I want to do in my life, because I was recording, I was working in the recording studio with a carpet on the walls. So it was, studios around 80s are full of carpets and, moquettes and everything, was pretty odd. And I was dreaming to be outside, and with girls and friends and play soccer and go on the beach. And I was, assisting a sound engineer in the studio. And then everything started like, like a game. But then here I am.
Pretty great. Brian, how about you?
I think for me, it's kind of a long, slow burn. When I was in middle school, I started doing theatrical productions, but I never wanted to be on stage unless they shoved me out there. But it was all about being backstage and holding the light, or assistant directing, stage management kind of stuff. I went on to do that at Cal State Long Beach. I have a degree in theater arts. And it wasn't until sort of the college experience I was like, oh, music is kind of cool. And I've always loved music. Obviously, I think a lot of us have musical backgrounds, but music, I would hear things in music that like it was never about the lyrics, instrumentation, just weird little things. And when I went back to school at the Conservatory of Recording Arts and Sciences, I thought I wanted to do live sound. And when we started doing like our post sound cycle, everything sort of clicked and fell into place. It was like, this is the perfect marriage of everything that I love: nerdy sound stuff, geeky computer things, and making other productions sound better. And so it wasn't exactly an aha moment, but just sort of this lot of roads that kind of came together all at once. It's like, oh, I can do this. Cool.
It's really cool. Michael, how about you?
Kind of similar to Brian. In high school, we had a electronic music class, which I thought was super fun. So I did all of that, and then I was listening to like Nine Inch Nails and Aphex Twin, and just like, these are cool sounds. I have no idea how they made them. And the first sort of, I'd call it sound design moment, was I realized somewhere in there that I could program drums at double speed and then pitch them down to half speed to be the rate the song was actually playing at, and get a wildly different timbre out of it. And then my high school teacher got mad at me for it and said that was cheating. But I ended up going to the Savannah College of Art and Design, focusing on game design. But I was in the library one day, and I spotted a room that had the same MIDI sound modules that we'd used in high school. And I said, ooh, they must have an electronic music class. I want to take that. And then that was in the film building. I was like, oh, you can do, I guess that does make sense, that sound, you need to do movie sound, and it's not, the sound of the Matrix is not on set at all. So I would, slow burn with moments of realization of like, okay, the Matrix is really cool. How'd that work? Or Jurassic Park, or just not having cool sound moments, but never coming up to that connection of like, oh, somebody has to make this. I can make that. Let's see what I can do.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Fun.
Yeah, that's really cool. Mark, how about you?
Yeah, I come from the world of music as well. And I think my little aha moment was the first time I ever put on my dad's headphones and listened to something in stereo. And that stereo image was like in my brain. And I was like, what? And that just blew my mind. Oddly enough, I've loved music so much that I knew that I couldn't work in it. So I took my sort of like abilities with being a recording engineer, and I sort of stumbled into post accidentally. I applied at this place that did like radio ads and stuff like that, and I ended up just loving it. And so that's kind of how I always stayed in post. But yeah, that was kind of my aha moment, was listening to my dad's vinyl records in stereo with the headphones on and being like, God, that is so cool. So.
Do you remember any of the records?
Oh yeah, it was all Paul Simon,
Sure.
stuff. Which still I'll go back and listen to that stuff. It's great.
Graceland was mine. Yeah, that was a good one. I guess I want to ask you, like, obviously all of you guys worked on these shows are great, and just in general, like, long careers. Do you prefer it when like the showrunner or the EP or the director, is it easier for you when they have strong ideas about the sound, or is it actually preferable to be like, if not left alone, but like a little bit left alone and like kind of figure it out on your own, I guess? Maurizio, what would you say?
Well, I have both experience, and it depends of the showrunners and depend of the director who giving you directions. And because if you met the right person, it can be the dream of your life. Otherwise, the same situation can become very fast the nightmare of your life. Because the level of frustration can go like at the top level at 0 dBFS, and the satisfaction, go at, minus 120. And, and that's, the average, the dynamic average about your sensation and you really feel and in that ended up in the wrong place.
Mhm.
And because sometimes, I have the sensation that sometimes people really do not feel the same way I feel regarding the sound. And sound is so important in my life because I'm studying, the 24-hour a day about, the way that is around me, and I always, get captured about tiny nuances and things. It seems that, people don't have the same, taste to understand, and we don't speak the same language. And
Right.
I don't know if I'm answer correctly to your question.
No, that's good. That's good. I think Ryan, how about you? What do you think?
Yeah, I think the perfect marriage is having them knowing exactly what they want and trusting us to deliver that. I think the in my experience, the problems arise when they're unsure of what they want and they're too concerned. Oh, well, is this too scary for this subset of the potential audience? But then if we do that, is it going to be too? And it's just constant self-doubt and sort of, our role is almost like a therapist at that point, where it's like, what are you after here? So I've always said I'd much rather work on the worst show in television with a great crew than like the best show in television with the worst crew. And with Shogun, it just so happened that those, the best of both worlds came together. Justin knew exactly what he wanted, and he 100% trusted us to get there. And it wasn't without challenging each other, and that's what I really love too. I love having a creative voice, not just someone to sit there and take notes and check boxes, but to hit for the fences every once in a while. And they don't always have to be home runs, but like to have the support to know that we can try is what keeps me coming back for more.
Yeah. Michael, how about you?
I'd say openness and trust are probably almost more important than knowing exactly what you want or just, go wild. A lot of the times with the go wild, you'll do something that you think is great, and it's not actually what they were thinking about, but they didn't tell you about that.
Mhm.
And that can cause problems. And having too much of a, like, I want it to sound exactly this way, maybe doesn't actually work for the show sometimes. And that can be, friction there. But just having that, this is what I'm aiming for. These are the goals that we want for the sound for this. And I trust you to get there. And even if it takes a few variations and we've got to, go back and forth a bit, that trust and openness to new ideas from both ends is, the most pleasurable way to work
Right.
with little frustration. Have somebody, I want it to sound exactly like this thing from this other thing, and it's like, okay, but that was already done.
Right. Mark, how about you?
Yeah, I think one of the important lessons that probably all sound people learn at some point in their career is that not every idea that I have is going to be great, and that you need to value the synergetic output that all team members will have, on a project. I always say that we're all in a rowboat and we all want to be rowing in the same direction, basically. Um, and but on the other hand, like I think it's also important to kind of like if you have ideas that you think are good, go for them, and try to like, hey, here's something here's an idea I had, because in a way, with sound, especially we tend to be on our own planet a little bit, and we're kind of the experts on that planet. And so presenting ideas and then being completely egoless in like, oh, you hated that idea? That's fine. That's fine. we'll get that out of here. Let's go the completely opposite direction. That's the thing you gotta be in. I can't tell you how many times I've got a note from a producer and I thought, oh my God, that is the dumbest note. And then we did it and it was amazing. Like that only has to happen a few times where you're like, okay, like I'm just gonna like I'm just gonna listen to what other people's opinions and value them, So
Yeah, one of the things that you definitely have to learn early on is you can't be precious with any of your stuff. It's just what's the final product? Who really has final say on the final product?
Yeah.
Ultimately, we all want to keep working with people.
But yeah.
Ultimately, we want to keep working with people, and so like to have that, like you said, that trust with each other is paramount.
Maurizio, what were you gonna say?
Another phrase that comes to my mind that sometimes I repeat to myself, that James Cameron one time says, I don't remember the occasion, but he says, "Don't give me what I've asked for, but give me what I need." And so this is another pretty cool reality that sometimes, we have to afford. And sometimes you have to get to the director or to the showrunner something that in a way that he understand that it was through him that you get to the final result. And that's another important element that connect with the psychological approach that every one of us, I think, that needs very much to, put the ship in the harbor.
Yeah.
The psychology of sound is pretty wild, especially in this setting.
I didn't realize that was so much of a part of it, right? But it really is, like you said. I think Brian, you said, like it's like almost like you're the therapist a little, right? Like that kind of thing. Yeah.
There's the psychology of the sound design itself, and there's the psychology of working in the team as the sound designer.
Yeah.
And
at the end of the day, it's not our show as much as we want to take credit, and take ownership of that stuff. We can take ownership of our part of it, but you always hope that the sum of everybody's part is greater than whatever that saying is,
Yeah. I think that's it. The sum is greater than the parts. The sum of the whole is greater than the parts, right? Isn't that the idea?
Yeah. Look, I'm not a mathematician. I don't know these things.
We could wrap it up there. This has been great though. And just once again, production sound mixer Maurizio Argentieri from Ripley, supervising sound editor Brian Armstrong from Shogun, sound designer Michael Schapiro from Star Trek Strange New Worlds and Star Trek Discovery, and sound mixer Mark Jensen from Welcome to Wrexham. Thank you all so much for doing this. It was really great hearing you talk about this and all your work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. A lot of fun.